We're not here today because anybody's in trouble or we're singling out any one particular person or group of people. We're just here to make sure that everybody's on the same page, okay? All right, we're going to save the questions to the end so we can make sure that we don't go over our time and we're able to go over all the information that we need to review today. All right. So we're both clicking, huh? All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to discuss what current protections are and where they come from. We're going to define the key terms, including discrimination, workplace harassment, and sexual harassment. We're going to identify different types of harassment and situations that can occur. And we're going to discuss how to avoid participating in harassing behavior. And lastly, we're going to identify how to handle harassment and discrimination. So, why should we be concerned about harassment? First of all, harassment is a violation of someone's civil rights. Harassment can be very costly to an employer and its customers, and our customers are the citizens of Montgomery. Harassment can result in low morale, high absenteeism, reduced productivity, and employee turnover. What do you think is the #1 reason why people leave employment? See, you half right and half wrong. Most people think what he just said first, that people leave their jobs because of pay. People think that that's the #1 reason why people leave employment. But research has shown that that is not the #1 driving reason why people leave their jobs. They leave their jobs just for those reasons that I just said: low morale, low morale issues, issues with their coworkers, issues with their supervisors. I always tell people you spend more waking hours with who? Coworkers. You spend more waking hours with people you work with than anybody else. So if you're coming to work and it's not a situation where people are treated with dignity and respect, you're really not going to be that happy there, are you? Okay? All right. So what we're going to talk about is discrimination and harassment, and we're going to focus on unlawful discrimination, because to discriminate is to differentiate, and we all discriminate every day. The issue is if you do unlawful discrimination, and that's where you make an unfair or unequal treatment of an individual or group based on a protected status. Harassment is unwelcome conduct based on a protected status, and the key things there are unwanted and protected status. And workplace harassment is unwelcome conduct based on a protected status that occurs in the employment context. Doesn't say that it has to happen at work, but it's related to work, okay? People call me on a regular basis. I get at least one call a week where I'm told that the employee will say I'm being harassed. And I'll say, you're being harassed? What do you mean you're being harassed? My supervisor's picking on me every time I'm a minute late, or if I do this or I do that, they're picking on me. Well, as we define workplace harassment, that does not meet the definition of workplace harassment. Those are issues involving working conditions. What I'm talking about violates someone's civil rights, and it goes into protected status, what we talked about earlier. So the first 5 things that we talk about when we mean protected status come from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII. And they're race, color, sex, national origin, and religion. Okay? When I say race, color, and sex, I'm saying race, color, and sex. I'm not saying minority and female. Okay? A lot of the times people think about when you say race, color, and sex that you're only referring to minorities and you're only referring to females, and they're the only people protected by these laws. And that's not true. Okay? You also have age, and it protects people who are age 40 and above, and that's the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. You have the Pregnancy Discrimination Act that protects people who are pregnant or who may become pregnant. You have the Americans with Disabilities Act that protects people that have disabilities. And basically, a disability is defined as a major life activity. So when you think about a major life activity, we're talking about walking, talking, breathing, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, all of those things that we take for granted each day. We have enough people in here that I can safely say that someone in here is protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. You're either protected for because of your own disability, or you're protected from it because you're associated with someone who has a disability as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay? And lastly, we have veteran status. Veteran status comes from the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And how it came into be is that we no longer have the draft. So you run into situations where, you know, we need people to be in our military. And whether they choose to go into the military full-time or if they choose to be in the reserves, they're protected by the Uniformed Services Reemployment and Employment Act. And what it basically does, it provides protection for someone who is working and say they decide to join the military or they're in reserve duty. And it protects them for up to 5 years. Their job is protected, okay? So that's the basis of what I'm saying when I say protected status. Sometimes people will say, well, why do you say they're harassing me? They just don't like me. Well, if they just don't like you and it's not related to one of these reasons, then it's not workplace harassment or discrimination as defined by employment laws. Everybody on the same page? Okay. All right. Now, I'm supposed to tell you what workplace harassment is, but the funny thing about it is that the EEOC says that the precise definition is elusive. So I can't tell you that this is exactly it and only it, and that's how it is, okay? All right. But I can tell you these 3 pointers that are very important. Each case must be handled individually. Courts are guided by what they call a reasonable person standard, because we all know that some people are more sensitive and some people are less sensitive than others. So what the courts use is what they call the reasonable person standard. If a reasonable person was in that situation, would they have felt harassed, okay? And the last point is the most important point to me. If y'all don't remember anything else that we talk about, when y'all leave here, remember this. It's seen through the eyes of the victim and not the perpetrator. I don't know how many times I've been told I was just kidding, I was just joking, I didn't mean to hurt their feelings, or even they're just too sensitive, that's just me and that's how I am. Well, that's not how it's viewed. It's viewed through the eyes of the victim, through the lens of the reasonable person standard, okay? Harassers do not fit a demographic or social profile. They are of all ages, races, and occupations. I'm pretty sure most of y'all have heard about the Me Too campaign and everything that's been going on in Hollywood and the situations that we've had lately. And I think the one that stood out to me the most in this situation is the Terry Crews situation. Do y'all know who Terry Crews is? Terry Crews is a very popular actor. He is a big, muscular, very buff guy, okay? And he came out and he said that he was groped, inappropriately touched by a Hollywood executive or someone in Hollywood. Now, we see this man, you know, big guy, you know, and you go, what? You're saying that someone did these things to you? And to me, it just shows it can happen to anybody. You know, the victim can be anybody and the perpetrator can be anybody. They can be of the same sex, okay? So these are things that we have to keep in mind. We can't just say that, like I said earlier, that all the time the victim in these cases is going to be a female. It's not always that way, okay? So be open-minded. All right, sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination that contains all 3 elements. It is of a sexual nature, and it's important for you to understand that it says it's of a sexual nature. It didn't say it's of a sexual desire. You know, people will say, I'm not attracted to them. What are they talking about? You know, I don't want to be with that person. It didn't say that it was of a sexual desire. It said of a sexual nature. It's unwelcome, okay? And there's a big difference between being unwelcome and being consensual. That goes to the Matt Lawler situation. A lot of the women say, yes, I did consent to have sex with him. I did consent to a relationship with him. But because of the position that he held, his position of power, I felt like I was going to face some detriment to my employment, my career, so I felt like I had no choice but to consent to it. So it's a difference from being consensual and being welcomed, okay? So just because you consent doesn't mean that you wanted the behavior or welcomed the behavior, all right? And it has detrimental consequences to work performance and or work environment. Now, to back up and talk about his situation a little further, employers can hold people to a higher standard than the law holds them to. And a lot of these situations that have come up dealing with Matt Lawler, the statute to file with the EEOC has passed. It's 180 days, okay? So it's gone. But the employer is not bound by that. They can hold their employees to a higher standard, and they can say that we don't, allow that type of behavior, okay? All right. It can be any of the following: unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Points to remember: the harasser can be man or a woman. The victim does not have to be of the opposite sex. And the harassment does not have to be motivated by a romantic or sexual desire. One of the cases that really spells all of that out deals with some men that worked on an oil rig. And basically what had happened, a new employee had started working with them, and he did not fit their definition of what they felt like a masculine male should be, okay? So they proceeded to play practical jokes on him and pick on him and call him names that were all of a derogatory sexual nature. He reported the behavior and was basically told, get back to work, you are acting like a sexually derogatory name. Okay, that was the response he received. So he tried to do that, he tried to go back to work, and it really didn't work out for him, okay? So he decided, I just don't want to deal with this anymore, I'm tired of this, and he quit his job. He filed a lawsuit, and basically, things were looking pretty good for the employer. This was in the 1990s. Things were looking pretty good for the employer. He first filed it in circuit court. The employer won. The defense was, these men were just playing a practical joke on him. They did not want to sleep with him. No one was trying to sleep with him. And, they were just playing pranks. Yeah, it might have not been in good taste, but that's all they were doing. He appealed, he lost his appeal. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and that's when we got our clarification on exactly, because see, when you read it, when it says protected status, it says sex, because of sex. So sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination, okay? So what they did, they broke that definition down for us, and they made it clear that it's of a sexual nature. Doesn't have to be of a sexual desire, as we talked about. So they ended up finding in favor of the employee. So in saying all of this, what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, why do we come to work? What are we here to do? Do a job. Yeah, that's what we're here to do. So, they should have just treated the man with dignity and respect, and that would have solved the situation. I've talked to people, though, and I've had some situations where, for whatever reason, it might have been a custom in their departments or something that they do, but a lot of the times they like to haggle on the new person. And I'm not saying that you can't play and have a good time at work, because we already said we spend most of our waking hours here at work. But I'm going to go back to what I told my daughter that's in elementary school. Everybody ain't playing if everybody ain't laughing. So you got to make sure you're laughing with people and not laughing at people. So be mindful of what you're saying and treat people with dignity and respect. I always tell people, call folks by their name. You don't want to call them anything else. You'll solve all of that if you call people by their names. And just because sometimes people giggle doesn't always mean it's funny. All right? So there's two forms of harassment: quid pro quo, tangible job benefit, and hostile work environment. Quid pro quo is Latin for this, for that. You go out with me, I'll get you a promotion. You don't go out with me, your job gonna be, you're gonna hate you come to work every day. All right, so that's the this for the that. It's the kind that we most commonly hear about, but it's the kind that occurs least often in the workplace. With quid pro quo, the perpetrator is always going to be a supervisor, or owner, or a boss. Why? Right, they have control over the this for the that, okay? So it's always going to be one of those people. Caution, caution, caution. Relationships that begin as consensual may end up being perceived as having been coerced. This is especially true in relationships between supervisors and subordinates. My aunt worked at Russell Corporation for over 30 years. She met her husband at Russell Corporation. They have been married now for almost 30 years. So people meet at work, relationships develop at work. You know, it happens. But this is the key to it. As long as it's consensual and welcomed, and y'all are having a good time, it's your business, okay? But the minute that becomes unwelcome, it becomes the city's business. So be mindful of that and be mindful of that behavior. I have had to investigate situations that were like that. So just think about that paper trail that's going to come into play in those situations. So be mindful of that. When the behavior becomes unwelcome, it becomes the responsibility of the city. All right? Hostile work environment. It occurs when harassment is so pervasive and or severe that it's difficult to bear and it unreasonably interferes with the work. The perpetrator can be anyone, supervisor, it can be a coworker, it can be a vendor, it can be a customer, okay? The examples are repeated, gratuitous, derogatory remarks about individuals in the office, repeated undesirable physical contact, such as brushing up against someone, repeated unwelcome comments, questions, etc. about a protected status. The one that really, the case that stands out to me deals with a restaurant. And this, they had a female server in the restaurant, and she had some customers that would come in, and they would constantly say things to her of a very derogatory sexual nature, okay? She would request to not wait on them. And her supervisor told her, get your tip, they always tip you, go on and wait on them, okay? So this last particular time that she waited on them, they went a step further than just saying things to her. They actually started touching her, okay? So, in addition to doing this type of training, I do customer service training. And I will be the first person to tell you that the customer is not always right. Anytime the customer asks you to do something illegal, unethical, that's going to be a harm to you or a harm to someone else, a safety issue, violates policy or procedures, the customer ain't right, okay? So in this situation, what could the manager have done? Could have assigned maybe another server to him? What else? I think he had a lot of options. Yeah, talk to the customers. You know, we believe in treating people with dignity and respect. And if y'all can't come here and do that, then you're going to have to take your business someplace else. Or he could have waited on them. Okay? So what ended up happening in this situation, he tried to say, well, they're the customers. What am I supposed to do about it? I couldn't do anything about it. Well, the courts felt like he could have, okay? So it's not good enough to say, well, they don't work here, but the employee has to come here to work, okay? This is where they work. So we have a duty and an obligation to make sure that they work in an environment that's harassment and discrimination free, okay? All right, we have physical and verbal and nonverbal behaviors. The key to all of these is they must be unwanted. You got touching a body or clothing, holding, grabbing, pushing, shoving, pinching, fondling, massaging, patting, hugging, and kissing. All right, y'all don't go back to the office and say, that woman from personnel said, I can't look at nobody, I can't touch nobody, I can't hug nobody. I didn't say that, okay? You know, I'm a Baptist. This past Sunday was Communion Sunday. At our church, what we do communion, and what we fellowship, hug everybody. So a lot of folks, we hug us down here in the South. It's nothing wrong with that. But if you're hugging somebody and you hug them and they get stiff as a board, what are they saying? You're too much in my personal space, don't hug me no more, okay? Or if you go to hug somebody and they do you like this instead of like this, they telling you, shake my hand. I don't want you hugging me. So, you know, they don't have to verbally tell you, I don't want you in my personal space like that. So I'm not telling you you can't hug somebody. I'm not telling you you can't touch anybody, but be mindful of it. And then we're going to go back to what we said earlier. It's seen through the eyes of the victim. So this stuff about, well, I'm just a hugger. Well, you're going to just hug somebody else. If she doesn't want you to hug her or he doesn't want you to hug her, don't hug them. You know, it's not, well, I don't feel that way about them. I'm not like that. Your intentions don't matter, okay? So if somebody doesn't want you touching them, don't touch them. That's simple, you know, so keep that in mind. Just be mindful of that. Use that as a gauge. Now, we also have accidental bumping against, but when we get to those last three, physical assault, those physical intimidation, coerced sexual intercourse, attempted rape, and rape, your job is going to be the last thing you're going to be worried about because you could be facing criminal charges under those circumstances, okay? All right, verbal conduct, again, it must be unwanted. And remember, just because someone laughs doesn't mean it's okay or they found it funny. Most of the time, I'm going to say something, but sometimes I'm at a loss for words, believe it or not, y'all. And what I'll do is I'll get real quiet. So instead of me maybe laughing, I'm just not saying nothing. And I'm thinking to myself, did they really just say that? You know, so, you know, pay attention to people's cues and how they're responding to stuff. Or if they are laughing and then they're sort of like walking away from you, then they probably didn't feel too comfortable about it. So just be mindful of those things. One of the cases that deals with verbal conduct, it actually wasn't a case, it was an investigation that I was involved in, that I was very surprised with it. I had done some training like this, and afterwards, one of the people in the training, he came to talk to me, and he's Mexican. And it's been several years ago. And we're just going to say, for sake of the class, his name is Juan. So Juan comes and he tells me a lot of the things that I talked about in the class, he experiences them at work. He says that I really like my job. You know, I don't want to be complaining or anything like that, but you said to talk to you if, you know, these things were occurring. So that's why I'm talking to you. And I said, well, what do you mean? What are you saying happens? So he said that he was called names like wetback and other names, and that he's never called by his name, that he's always called Hector or Jose or whatever, but not his name, and that like at lunchtime and so forth, they would always pick at him about what he was eating and, you know, say stuff like taco, whatever, you know, just picking at him. And so I said, okay. And so I asked him, and since he's in here and I know him, I'll use him in this example. I asked him, I said, well, is it everybody? Is it your supervisor? Is it a coworker? Is it anyone in particular? He said, well, it's really just one person. It's Henry Jackson. I went, okay, all right. So I bring Henry in, and I go, well, Henry, I said, I need to talk to you about something that's come to my attention. I said, well, do you know Juan? And the first thing Henry says to me is, oh, yeah, I know Juan. Juan's a good guy, hard worker, you know, I really like him. He does a great job. And I go, oh, oh, okay. And so I said, well, do you know anything about him being called any kind of names or anything like that? He's like, oh yeah, I joke around with him all the time. I call him wetback and, all kind of stuff he was telling me. He even said more than what Juan told me. And I'm like, well, you do understand that that's not appropriate and that you shouldn't be calling him those types of names. Oh, I'm just playing. We just laugh about it and everything. I like Juan. Juan's a good guy. And we went on and we had further conversation. They talked. He apologized. I commend them. They worked their way through it. Needless to say, I talked to Henry some more. We did a little sensitivity training and had some one-on-one conversations, but they worked it out. And that was the good thing that happened. Now, it's a lot easier if they could have maybe worked it out between themselves, but that doesn't always happen. But I was glad that that happened. And I followed up with Juan, and at that time, he said the behavior had stopped. So that's the outcome. That's the goal that you want to have. But sometimes that always doesn't happen, okay? So be mindful of that. I tell people all the time, the best thing to do is call people by their names. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to be curious about things. We already established that we work with people we're with working people more waking hours than we are with anybody else. You're going to develop those friendships, those relationships. I'm not telling you that you can't ask questions. I want people to see me as who I am. I'm a black female, okay? Can't speak for all black folks, can't speak for all females, but I am a black female. I have a friend. We've been friends for over 25 years. My hair's like this sometimes, my hair's straight sometimes, it's down sometimes, it's all kind of ways, okay? She's white female. So she asked me one day, she said, can I touch your hair? I said, sure, touch it. I know her. We got that kind of relationship. I knew she was just curious. She was coming from a place of wanting to understand. I didn't have a problem with that. Now, Susie walking down the street doesn't need to be touching my hair. I don't know Susie like that. So it's okay to have questions or be curious about things that are different. Because we are different, and I didn't have a problem with it. Come from a place of wanting to understand instead of a place of wanting to judge, okay? And people tend to be okay with that. All right, nonverbal, again, it must be unwanted. Circulating or displaying of offensive materials, including posters, calendars, cartoons, and emails. Please know that delete does not work on your computer. Anything you've ever done on that computer is there and will always be there. Email is not your friend, okay? When you are at work, you're using the computer at work. It doesn't matter if you go out on your own personal email address, you're still using city equipment, and you are held to the standard of what you're supposed to do with city equipment. So please be mindful of that, all right? All right, speak up at the time of the harassing conduct and say no to the harasser. This is not required. We would like to think that we're all adults and that we can work things out for ourselves instead of getting me or someone else involved. But that doesn't always happen. We just talked about the situation where I talked about Juan. But I was involved in another situation years ago. I worked at a company and we had locations in North Alabama. And me and the personnel manager would go and visit these locations. The personnel manager was relatively new, and she had been talking to one of the plant managers at one of our facilities, and they had developed a very good long-distance phone relationship, So it was time for us to go up and visit the facility. So we drove up to North Alabama to the facility. He had taken us on a nice tour. We had gone out to eat and, all that good stuff, went over the stuff that we needed to go over for work. So we were sitting down getting ready to leave, and they started talking about some things. So she asked him a question, and he responded back to her and said, oh, I just Jewed him down. She said, what'd you say? He said, I Jewed him down. She said, I heard what you said. And then he went on to explain to her you know, I just kept badgering them about the price. She said, no, I'm not asking you what you were trying to say that meant. She said, I'm Jewish. He said, oh, I didn't know that. And she said, oh, so you wouldn't have said that if you'd have known I was Jewish. And to say the least, y'all, it just got worse from there. Both of them had planted their feet in the ground. She was too sensitive, he was ignorant, and it just kept going back and forth. They never mended their friendship. A simple trying to just say, I apologize, I didn't mean to say that. I'll know in the future that I should be more mindful of the things that I say or aware of what I say. Or instead of just saying, you're too sensitive. And then at the same time, she maybe could have explained to him why she felt the way she felt. But it was just, no, we just ain't gonna come to no common ground over this at all. So sometimes even if you do speak up, you're not gonna have the right outcome. But the goal is that the behavior doesn't occur again, and that behavior did not occur again. So, you know, it's good if you can speak up. Everybody can't speak up, and you're not required to speak up. If you don't feel comfortable enough to speak up, then you have other options. The main thing is you need to keep good records of any communication, and you need to follow the reporting process. For those of you, I see some of y'all in here, you're in public safety. I know y'all are strict chain of command folks, but you don't have to follow the chain of command when it comes to reporting harassing or discriminatory behavior. You can break the chain of command, okay? In most circumstances, you'll report direct to your supervisor, and your supervisor will initiate the appropriate action. In most cases, that's just going to be reporting it higher up through the chain of command. I will caution you all who are supervisors, who may have people report behavior to you. You have a duty to act, okay? So this stuff about, I just want to come talk to you and tell you, I don't want you to tell nobody and all this kind of stuff, you can't do that. You have to report it, okay? So what I caution people when they come to me and they say, well, I just want to talk to somebody, but I don't want you to tell anybody. And I said, well, let me stop you right here. Because depending on what you tell me, I may have a duty to act. And in doing so, I want you to be mindful of what you're saying to me. So if you say something to me that I have no choice, that I have to do something about it, then I have to. I can't keep it in confidence, okay? So supervisors, be mindful of that. All right, you can also report it to city investigation, the personnel director, your elected official, who is the mayor, or the mayor's assistant, who is Matt McLeod, okay? So you have several avenues, and you don't have to follow that chain of command. You can go to any of those areas that you feel most comfortable with, all right? Okay, retaliation is an adverse employment action taken by an employer against an employee who participated in a protected activity. Adverse actions can include termination, refusal to hire and or promote, threats, unjustified negative evaluations. Protected activities can include opposition to a practice believed to be unlawful discrimination, participation in an employment discrimination proceeding, or requesting a reasonable accommodation. All right. You really need to make up your mind, if you're a supervisor or in any type of position of authority, as my grandma would say, keep living, because at some point, someone's going to say you did something, whether you did it or not, okay? So you need to be prepared to know how you're going to respond right now. Most often, I see two things happen. Goes to two extremes. You either, I'm going to pick on Monica now. I either let Monica come to work whenever she want to come to work, do whatever she want to do when she get there, and tell me what she going to do and what she ain't going to do, okay? You can do whatever you want. You're untouchable. Or I see the other extreme. You know, Monica used to could call me and say, oh my goodness, this traffic is crazy today. I'm going to be about 5 minutes late. Say, okay, that's fine. Thanks for letting me know. But now let her be a minute late. I'm meeting her at the door, writing her up. So you can't get too easy or too hard. You got to stay however you were. You know, if you were always a tough taskmaster, that's what you got to be. If you always were sort of loosey-goosey, that's how you got to be. Things can't change now. You know, it can't be, Carmen Monica is just doing this, and that. Oh, how long has that been going on? The 2 years she's been here. Well, why is it just now an issue? Okay? So you have to be mindful of those things. And I know it's hard when someone's accused you of something that you haven't done. I think that's even harder than when they've accused you of something and you know you did it. But you have a duty and a responsibility to treat them the same. Because what can happen is the claim for the harassment or discrimination can be unsubstantiated. But the claim for retaliation can be founded and very costly. All right? All right, preventive steps. A policy written in plain English so that it is readily understood by all employees. It's in the rules and regulations, and it's on the website. We have a zero tolerance policy. And a zero tolerance policy doesn't mean just because you're accused of it or even that you're found guilty of harassment or discrimination, that you're automatically terminated. It means that the appropriate corrective or disciplinary actions will be taken. A procedure which will encourage victims to report unwelcome behavior. In doing that, we make it where you don't have to report to your supervisor. Why do you think you don't have to report to your supervisor? Exactly. The supervisor might be the one you report those, so you're going to report to the person that's doing the behavior to them, that they're doing the behavior. Doesn't work too well, so that's why you have other options. Train and educate employees and supervisors, that's what we're doing right now. Ensure a prompt and thorough investigation of every complaint and respond with prompt corrective action, including disciplinary action where appropriate. Now, another thing to make people clear on, a lot of the times the victim will say, well, what'd you do to him? What happened? I want to know what you do to him. Well, do we publish that, yesterday I wrote Monica up because she was late for the umpteenth time, so I reprimanded her. So do we go around publishing that, telling that? No. So in this situation, we wouldn't do it either. The thing that I go back to the victim and say, has the behavior stopped? And if they say yes, we're all good. If they say no, then we need to have another conversation, okay? All right, preventive measures. Harassment by the supervisor. The employer exercised reasonable care to prevent and promptly address the harassing conduct, and the employee unreasonably failed to use the preventive and corrective measures provided by the employer. So it has a twofold situation to it. I was involved with another employer situation where harassment was reported by a supervisor, it was investigated, and it was found that pretty likely substantiated that the supervisor was what the employee accused him of. Well, when he got down to it, this is what the employer said. Through the words of the victim, once it was reported and investigated, the behavior stopped. We don't say he did. But we don't know what it's supposed to do. So the employer is out of the situation. Supervisor might not fit into it. Okay? All right? Then on the flip side of that, the employee has a responsibility also. The employee has a duty to report it. Did I cut off? You did. Can y'all hear me? I talk a little loud. Hello? Okay. So the employee has responsibility too. They have to report it. I did one of these sessions during this time period that we're doing it. Someone walked up to me and said, I want to talk to you about one of my friends that works someplace, and they've been talking about some things that have been going on at their job, and it's just what you're saying. What do they need to do? And what did I say to them? What do they need to do? They need to report it. I said, well, the first thing they got to do, they got to report it. Because if they don't report it, then they can't, show that they followed their internal processes and procedures. So you got to report it, all right? So harassment by a non-supervisor, the employer knew or should have known of the harassing conduct, and the employer failed to take prompt and appropriate corrective measures. So in the restaurant situation, to me, the manager would be pretty hard pressed to say, even if the server didn't report it to him, that he didn't know that that behavior was going on. So it's knew or should have known of the behavior, and then you have a duty to do something about it, okay? All right. So now it's time for y'all to answer some questions. Sexual harassment means bothering someone in an unwanted sexual nature. True. Harassment must persist over a long period of time to be considered actionable. False. A consensual sexual relationship between two people cannot be deemed sexual harassment. Which one? True. Oh, I'm sorry, false. Remember, we went back and we talked about consent and welcome, supervisor, position of power. Yeah, you could have said yes, but that didn't mean that you agreed to it. You just did it because, all right. Sexual harassment can occur when both the harasser and the victim are the same sex, even if neither party is sexually attracted to members of his or her gender. Oil rig, remember? All right. Harassment can be perpetrated by a subordinate against his or her supervisor. True. All right. I wouldn't even have to be up here. Y'all wouldn't even have to come over here and sit here and listen to me talk if we did this. We just treated each other with dignity and respect. That's the key of what we're talking about. Any form of harassment related to an employee's race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, or other protected characteristic is a violation of those expectations. Harassment, the key is unwanted, physical, verbal, or visual behavior that is related to or because of some protected status. And these protected statuses are, what are the protected statuses? Race, sex, okay, now we have sex for gender, disability, religion, age, veteran status, pregnancy, we got age, national origin, it's one more. Veteran status, got them all. Thank you. Now, we're going to pass out some sign-in forms to say that y'all sat through the whole class, because y'all don't want us contacting your supervisor saying you weren't here. I got it. And I'll answer any questions that you have. Sign in to confirm that you're here. You need a pen? Oh, you're going to help me. All right. You can pass those back for me. And here's some pens, just in case some of them need them. Y'all need something to write with? Turn my mic off.